Jake Matthews wiped the grease off his hands and checked his oxygen gauge. 40 minutes left. Plenty of time to finish repairing the sensor array and get back to Tidebreak Station before dinner. The underwater world of Satara 7 always amazed him, even after 2 years working here. Massive coral towers stretched toward the surface, glowing with bioluminescent algae. Schools of six-fin creatures darted past his helmet. Beautiful, but deadly if you made one wrong move. He twisted the final bolt on the sensor housing and watched the display flicker back to life. Perfect. Another repair done with nothing but a wrench and some waterproof tape. The fancy engineers back on Earth would probably laugh at his methods, but out here on the frontier, you learned to make do with what you had. That's what mechanics did. They solved problems. Jake was about to push off toward the surface when his handheld scanner started beeping. The sound cut through the quiet hum of his breathing apparatus. He pulled the device from his belt and frowned at the readings. Something big was moving in the trench below him, about 200 meters down. The movement patterns looked wrong. Erratic. Desperate. Protocol said he should surface immediately and report it. Satara 7 had some massive predators in the deep zones, and humans were specifically told to avoid the trenches. But something about those readings bothered him. The movement didn't match any predator he'd studied. It looked like something was trapped. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He angled his body downward and fired his descent jets. The water grew darker as he dropped. His helmet lights carved tunnels through the murky depths. The pressure gauge climbed steadily. 100 meters. 150. His suit creaked but held firm. At 200 meters, he saw it. A massive coral shelf had collapsed, and beneath the rubble, something was struggling. Jake kicked closer, his light sweeping over the scene. Then he saw her. An alien being, unlike anything he'd encountered before. Her skin shimmered with patterns of blue and silver that pulsed weakly. She wore some kind of form-fitting armor covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow and fade. Advanced technology, definitely. But right now, she was dying. A large piece of coral had pinned her legs, and she'd sunk into a layer of dense brine that sat at the bottom of the trench. Jake knew about brine pools. They were pockets of super salty water that didn't mix with the ocean above. Most creatures couldn't breathe in them. From the way she was thrashing weakly, Ceterans couldn't either. He didn't stop to think about politics or regulations or the fact that humans and Ceterans barely tolerated each other. Someone was drowning, and he had the tools to help. That was enough. Jake fired his jets and dropped beside her. She turned her head, and he saw her face through his helmet lights. Large eyes, almost luminous, filled with panic and fading awareness. She tried to reach toward him but didn't have the strength. Her mouth moved, but no sound carried through the water. He grabbed his plasma torch from his belt and fired it up. The cutting beam glowed bright orange in the dark water. He went to work on the coral, pinning her down, cutting through the densest parts and using his suit strength enhancers to push chunks aside. His oxygen gauge dropped lower. 20 minutes. 15. The last piece of coral shifted, and she was free. But she wasn't moving anymore. Jake grabbed her under the arms and kicked hard, pulling them both up out of the brine layer. Her body was limp. He checked for signs of life and found a faint pulse in her neck. She was still alive, but barely. Without hesitating, Jake pulled his emergency oxygen tube from his suit and pressed it against her mouth. The system wasn't designed for alien biology, but oxygen was oxygen. He held it there while he kicked upward with his free arm, fighting against her weight and the drag of the water. 10 minutes of oxygen left. The surface seemed impossibly far away. His muscles burned. The alien woman stirred slightly, her chest moving as she drew in the oxygen. Good. Keep breathing. Just keep breathing. Jake's mind raced through calculations. He couldn't take her to the main station. Security would ask too many questions. Ceteran officials would get involved. Given the current tensions, she might end up as a political prisoner or worse. But his personal hab module was isolated from the main complex. It had its own life support and medical supplies. Basic stuff, but maybe enough. He broke the surface, gasping. His oxygen gauge flashed red. 2 minutes left. He activated his emergency beacon, but set it to his private channel, the one only maintenance workers used. Then he dragged the unconscious alien toward his hab, staying low in the water to avoid the station's external cameras. Getting her inside was the hardest part. She was heavy, and the armor didn't help. But Jake had spent years hauling equipment and working in tight spaces. He knew how to move awkward loads. He sealed the airlock behind them and finally let himself breathe station air. The alien woman lay on his floor, water pooling around her. Her chest rose and fell steadily now. The glowing patterns on her skin pulsed with more strength. She was stable, at least for the moment. Jake looked at what he'd done. He'd just smuggled an unknown alien into his personal quarters, violated about 15 different station regulations, and possibly committed an act that could be considered espionage depending on who she was. He grabbed a blanket and carefully covered her. Tomorrow would bring problems. Tonight, he'd saved a life. Sometimes that was all that mattered. The alien woman woke up screaming. Jake nearly dropped his coffee mug as she bolted upright on his couch, her hands raised defensively, those luminous eyes wild with confusion. She spoke rapidly in a language that sounded like water flowing over stones, musical but urgent. Her head swiveled around his small quarters, taking in the human furniture, the tools scattered on his workbench, the half-eaten sandwich from last night. Hey, it's okay, Jake said, raising his hand slowly. You're safe. I pulled you out of the trench. You were drowning. She stared at him, her breathing rapid. Then she spoke again, this time in broken Galactic Common, the trade language most species used. You saved? Why? Because you needed help, Jake said simply. Do you remember what happened? Her expression shifted, memories flooding back. She touched her legs where the coral had pinned her, then looked at her hands as if confirming she was really alive. I remember, falling. Trap. Water that burns. She struggled for words. They want me dead. Who wants you dead? She hesitated, studying him carefully. Finally, she said, my name is Nalith. That is all you need to know. The less you know, the safer you are. Over the next 3 days, Jake learned that Nalith was possibly the most difficult patient he'd ever dealt with. She refused to stay in bed, insisted on examining every piece of equipment in his hab, and asked endless questions about human technology. She picked up his pipe wrench and turned it over in her hands like it was a museum artifact. This is your primary tool, she asked, incredulous. One of them, yeah. It is so simple. Just metal and leverage. Sometimes simple works best, Jake said, taking it from her and demonstrating how he'd used it to fix his sink last week. Your people probably have some fancy molecular reorganizer or something, right? We have precision matter sequences, yes. She watched him work with fascination. But they require specific conditions, calibrated energy sources, proper maintenance protocols. If one component fails, then you're stuck, Jake finished. This wrench? Dropped it off a platform once. 30-meter fall onto solid metal. Got a dent. Still works fine. Something shifted in Nalith's expression. Respect, maybe. She ran her fingers along the scarred metal surface. Crude but effective. I said this before, but I understand it better now. On the second day, she finally told him more. They were sitting at his small table, sharing ration packs that she picked at uncertainly. I was on Satara 7 for diplomatic purposes, she said carefully. There are factions among my people who oppose certain policies. They arranged an accident during my underwater tour. What kind of policies? Peace, she said quietly. Trade agreements with humanity. Research partnerships. Some of my people believe humans contaminate our worlds with your chaotic methods and unpredictable nature. She gestured at his cluttered workspace. They see rooms like this and think disorder. Danger. Jake looked around at his tools, his spare parts, his half-finished projects. Yeah, it wasn't neat, but he knew where everything was. And what do you see? Adaptation, Nalith said. Survival. You work with what you have instead of waiting for what you wish you had. On the third day, everything changed. Jake's comm unit buzzed with a station-wide announcement. All personnel were to prepare for a full habitat inspection within 24 hours. Security protocols had been upgraded. No exceptions. Jake's blood went cold. He looked at Nalith, who had gone very still. They are looking for me, she said. They know I survived. Then we hide you better. Where? Your quarters will be searched. Jake stood up and started pacing, his mind racing through the station's layout. He'd worked maintenance for 2 years. He knew every pipe, every duct, every system. There had to be somewhere. Then it hit him. The water filtration system. What? Nobody thinks about water filtration. It's just there, doing its job. The main tanks are huge, and there's a maintenance access chamber that's basically a small room. It's filled with recycled coolant for the heat exchangers. Nalith looked doubtful. You want me to hide in coolant? Can you breathe in it? It's oxygenated, She considered this. Ceteran physiology can extract oxygen from various liquid mediums, yes. But for how long? As long as it takes. I'll rig a breathing tube from hydraulic hoses. Keep you connected to air pockets. It'll be uncomfortable, but you'll be invisible. The next 12 hours were frantic. Jake collected supplies carefully, nothing that would raise suspicion. A length of flexible tubing here, some sealant there, a spare oxygen canister from the emergency locker. He made 3 trips to the filtration system, each time carrying parts of what he needed. When the inspection was 6 hours away, he brought Nalith down through the maintenance corridors. They moved during shift change when fewer people were around. She wore his spare maintenance jumpsuit with the hood up, just another worker moving through the station. The filtration chamber was exactly as cramped as he remembered. The coolant tank was a cylinder about 3 meters wide and 4 meters deep. Jake had rigged a breathing apparatus that looked like something from a nightmare, all tubes and seals and manual valves. This is insane, Nalith said, but she was already stripping off the jumpsuit. Welcome to human engineering. We specialize in insane. Jake tested the breathing rig one more time. The coolant is cold but not dangerous. The tube will give you air. There's a small platform about a meter down where you can brace yourself. I've set up a chemical light stick, so you won't be in complete darkness. She took the breathing apparatus, their hands touching briefly. Why are you doing this? You could turn me in. Probably get a reward. Jake thought about that. You know what I realized? You never told me why you were really here. You said diplomatic purposes, but that's vague. You could be anyone. Could be dangerous. He shrugged. But 3 days ago, I saw someone drowning, and I helped. That doesn't change just because things got complicated. Nalith smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. You are either very brave or very foolish. I'm a mechanic. We're usually both. She climbed into the tank, gasping as the cold coolant enveloped her. Jake helped her secure the breathing tube, showed her the emergency release valve, and confirmed she could reach the platform. Her shimmering skin looked ghostly in the dim light. Stay quiet, stay still, Jake said. I'll come get you when it's clear. He sealed the access hatch just as his comm unit buzzed. The inspection team was starting early. Jake ran back to his quarters, his heart pounding. He arrived just 30 seconds before the security team knocked on his door. 3 Ceteran soldiers in full armor, accompanied by a human station security officer named Rodriguez. Routine inspection, Rodriguez said, though his expression said it was anything but routine. Jake let them in, forcing himself to look annoyed rather than terrified. Sure, come on in. Mind the mess. The Ceterans moved through his quarters with precision, scanning every surface, checking every storage locker. One of them picked up Nalith's discarded armor piece that Jake had stupidly forgotten to hide. His stomach dropped. What is this? The soldier asked in heavily accented English. Jake's mind raced. Salvage. Found it near the coral beds during a repair dive last month. I was going to report it, but you know how paperwork is. Figured I'd get around to it eventually. The soldier studied him with unreadable eyes. Behind him, another soldier was scanning the bathroom. The third was checking under the bed. They were thorough. They were professional. And they were looking for someone specific. Rodriguez stepped closer to Jake, lowering his voice. Listen, Matthews. If you know anything about the missing Ceteran official, now's the time to say so. This is bigger than you realize. I fix pipes and sensors, Jake said flatly. I don't know anything about officials. The inspection took 4 to 5 minutes. They checked everything. They found nothing. Finally, they left, moving on to the next habitat. Jake waited a full hour before returning to the filtration system. His hands shook as he opened the access hatch. Nalith emerged from the coolant gasping, shivering, but alive. Jake wrapped her in thermal blankets and helped her back to his quarters through a different route. That night, as she warmed up with hot coffee, Nalith finally told him the complete truth. I am not just an official, she said quietly. I am Queen Nalith, matriarch of the Ceteran hierarchy. And the people trying to kill me are trying to start a war with humanity. Jake set down his own coffee very carefully. Well, he said. That explains why they're looking so hard. Jake stared at Nalith for a long moment, processing what she just said. Queen. She was an actual queen. He'd been hiding royalty in his water filtration system. He started laughing, couldn't help it. The absurdity of the whole situation finally hit him. This isn't funny, Nalith said, though a small smile tugged at her lips. It's a little funny, Jake managed between laughs. I stuffed a queen in a coolant tank. Pretty sure that's not standard protocol for hosting nobility. It kept me alive. That's better than any palace. Her expression grew serious again. But you need to understand what's happening. The faction trying to kill me, they call themselves the Tide Purists. They believe humanity is a contamination. Too chaotic, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be trusted near Ceteran worlds. And you disagree? I came here to sign a historic treaty. Full trade access, joint research facilities, cultural exchange programs. It would have opened 30 Ceteran worlds to human presence. She wrapped the thermal blanket tighter around herself. The purists saw it as an invasion. They decided the only way to stop it was to eliminate me and make it look like human sabotage. Jake felt his stomach sink. If they succeed in framing us, there's no treaty. Just war. Exactly. And humanity would lose. Our fleet outnumbers yours 20-1. Your colonies would be blockaded, your research stations shut down, your people expelled from this entire sector. Nalith looked at him directly. Millions would suffer because a few extremists fear change. The next morning, Jake tried to maintain his normal routine. He reported to the maintenance bay, picked up his work assignments, and acted like everything was fine. But he kept noticing things. The security patrols had doubled. Cameras that had been broken for months were suddenly working again. And station personnel were being watched more carefully, especially those who worked near the alien sections. His friend Beth cornered him during lunch break. She was a communications technician, sharp as a knife and impossible to fool. They'd worked together since Jake arrived on Tidebreak, had shared enough late-night repair emergencies to trust each other completely. Okay, what's going on with you? Beth demanded, sliding into the seat across from him in the mostly empty cafeteria. What do you mean? You've been acting weird for 3 days. Jumpy. Distracted. You took 17 minutes to replace a pressure valve yesterday. 17 minutes, Jake. You can do those in your sleep. Jake pushed his food around his tray. He'd barely eaten in days, too worried about Nalith, too stressed about getting caught. Beth wasn't going to drop this. She was like a dog with a bone when she sensed something wrong. He made a decision. Not here. Maintenance Tunnel 7. 20 minutes. Beth's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. Okay. 20 minutes later, they stood in one of the isolated service corridors where the noise of the station's systems covered conversation. Jake took a deep breath and told her everything. The rescue, the hiding, the inspection, and finally the truth about who Nalith really was. Beth listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock to determination. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her personal data pad and started typing rapidly. What are you doing? Jake asked. Checking something I noticed yesterday but thought was a glitch. Her fingers flew across the screen. All long-range communications have been restricted. The official reason is routine maintenance on the relay satellites, but Jake, I do communications maintenance. There's nothing wrong with those satellites. So someone's blocking outgoing messages. Not just blocking. Replacing them. Beth showed him her screen. Look at this. 3 days ago, an official Ceteran transmission went out announcing that Queen Nalith died in an underwater accident caused by faulty human equipment. It's been broadcast across 6 systems. Jake felt cold. But she's alive. Right. Which means the purists control the communication grid. The real Ceteran fleet thinks their queen is already dead. Nobody's coming to rescue her because nobody knows she needs rescuing. They stared at each other, the weight of the situation settling over them. They were 2 maintenance workers on a small research station, up against a conspiracy that had infiltrated station security and controlled the communications network. It was impossible. They should report this to someone higher up, someone with actual authority. The station commander, Jake said. We could. Commander Phillips has been holding private meetings with Ceteran military officers every day this week, Beth interrupted. Meetings that aren't on any official schedule. I know because I had to route secure channels for them. You think Phillips is in on it? I think we can't trust anyone in an official position right now. Beth started pacing, thinking out loud. We need to get a message out past the jamming field. Something that can reach the loyal Ceteran fleet and prove Nalith is alive. How? If they control the communications array. They control the standard communications. But what about the deep-sea research probe? It's scheduled for deployment in 2 days. It has its own transmission system for sending data back from the ocean depths. Long range, powerful signal, operates on completely different frequencies. Jake saw where she was going. We hijacked the probe. Load Nalitha's message into it and shoot it past the jamming field before anyone realizes what we've done. Exactly. But we'd need to reprogram the probe without anyone noticing, and we'd need Nalith to record a message that proves she's alive and can authenticate herself to her own people. They spent the next hour planning. Jake would use his maintenance access to work on the probe during his regular duties. Beth would create false work orders and maintenance logs to cover his presence. Nalith would provide the encryption codes that would prove her message was genuine. It was risky and required perfect timing, but it was their only shot. That night, Jake brought Beth to meet Nalith. The Queen studied the communications technician carefully, and Beth studied her right back. Two very different people, sizing each other up. "You're trusting her with your life," Beth said to Nalith. "He already saved it once. That bought considerable trust. And you're trusting me because?" "Because Jake trusts you. And because I've learned that sometimes the most capable people are the ones nobody's paying attention to." Nalith smiled slightly. "Mechanics. Technicians. The invisible workers who keep everything running. In my court, I'm surrounded by advisors and generals. Not one of them would have thought to hide me in a coolant tank." Beth laughed despite the tension. "Okay, I like her. Let's save her life." They got to work. Nalith provided a complex series of encryption codes, explaining that every member of the Ceteran royal family had unique authentication patterns that couldn't be faked. She recorded her message on Beth's secured datapad, speaking in formal Ceteran and identifying herself with ceremonial phrases that proved her identity. Jake spent the next day doing legitimate maintenance while secretly accessing the research probe systems. It was delicate work. One wrong move, one suspicious scan, and security would be on him instantly. He rewrote the probe's primary transmission protocols, buried Nalitha's message in what looked like standard scientific data, and set it to broadcast automatically once the probe reached deployment depth. Everything was going according to plan until the second evening. Jake was working in the probe bay when he heard voices approaching. He ducked behind her equipment rack just as three purist operatives entered. Not regular security. These were the real assassins, wearing civilian clothes but moving with military precision. "The launch is confirmed for tomorrow at 1400 hours, one of them said in Ceteran. Jake's translator implant picked it up clearly. "Good. Once the Queen is eliminated, we proceed with Phase 2. The station explosion will be blamed on human negligence. The Council will have no choice but to authorize military action." "What about the workers? The humans?" "Acceptable casualties. Actually, preferable. Makes the sabotage story more convincing." They were planning to blow up the entire station. Kill everyone. Frame humanity for all of it. Jake's blood ran cold. This was so much worse than he'd thought. He waited until they left, then ran to find Beth and Nalith. They had to move up the timeline. They had to act now. The probe launch was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, but they couldn't wait that long. The purists were planning something big, and hundreds of lives were at stake. "Can we launch the probe early?" Jake asked Beth. "Not without authorization codes from the commander's office." Nalith stood up, her bearing shifting into something regal and commanding despite the borrowed human clothes she wore. "Then we get the codes. You said this station has maintenance tunnels throughout." "Yeah, they connect everything." "Show me the path to the commander's office. I may not have my armor or weapons, but I'm still trained in infiltration." She looked at Jake. "Your species has a saying about desperate times, correct?" Jake grinned despite everything. "Desperate times call for desperate measures." "Then let's be desperate. And measure carefully." The maintenance tunnels of Tidebreak Station weren't designed for stealth missions. They were cramped, hot, and filled with pipes that clanged every time someone bumped into them. But they also went everywhere, including right past Commander Phillips' office. Jake led the way with a work light, Beth followed with her datapad ready, and Nalith moved behind them with surprising grace for someone unfamiliar with human architecture. They'd waited until midnight when most of the station slept and only skeleton crews monitored the systems. "This is crazy," Beth whispered as they crawled through a particularly narrow section. "We're breaking into the commander's office." "We're saving the station," Jake corrected. "Different thing." They reached the access panel that opened into the wall behind Philip's desk. Jake had installed the panel himself 6 months ago when they'd upgraded the power conduits. He carefully removed the screws, wincing at every tiny sound. Through the gap, they could see the office was empty and dark. Okay, his computer should be in sleep mode, Beth whispered. I need 3 minutes to crack his access codes and download the launch authorization. Maybe 4 if he's got better security than usual. You've got 2, Jake said. Guards patrol this corridor every 8 minutes. We saw them pass 4 minutes ago. Beth squeezed through the opening and moved to the desk. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, lines of code scrolling down her screen. Jake watched the corridor through a ceiling vent while Nalith kept her eyes on the other direction. His heart hammered so loud he was sure someone would hear it. Come on, Beth muttered. Almost there. Just need to bypass this last encryption layer. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Too early. The guards weren't supposed to be back yet. Beth, Jake hissed. 30 more seconds. The footsteps grew louder. Jake could see shadows approaching through the vent. 20 seconds. 15. Beth's data pad beeped softly as the download completed. She dove back through the wall panel just as the guards reached the office door. Jake sealed the panel with shaking hands, and they all pressed themselves flat against the tunnel wall, barely breathing. The guard stopped right outside. Did you hear something? Probably just the cooling systems. This whole place creaks. Yeah, guess so. Come on, let's finish the round. They waited a full 5 minutes after the footsteps faded before anyone moved. Beth let out a long breath and held up her data pad triumphantly. Got it. We can launch the probe whenever we want. Then we launch now, Nalith said firmly. Every hour we wait gives them more time to find us or execute their plan. They made their way to the probe deployment bay through a different route, one that avoided security checkpoints. The bay was deserted at this hour, just emergency lighting casting long shadows across the massive pool where the research probe waited. The probe itself was a sleek cylinder about the size of a small car, covered in sensors and sampling equipment. Jake approached the control console while Beth uploaded the launch codes. Nalith stood watch by the entrance, her posture alert. Everything was going smoothly until the console beeped a warning. What's wrong? Beth asked. Jake scanned the readout, his stomach sinking. The probe's got a physical lock on it. Someone installed a manual release mechanism. We can override the computer systems, but unless we remove that lock, the probe won't deploy. Where's the lock? Underwater. On the probe's docking clamp. About 10 meters down. They all looked at the dark pool. Jake was already stripping off his jacket and kicking off his boots. I'll be quick. Just keep that console ready to launch the second I surface. He dove in before anyone could argue. The water was cold, maintained at Ceteran ocean temperatures. His lungs burned as he kicked downward, following the probe's hull with his hands. There. He felt the mechanical lock, a simple bolt system that someone had added to prevent unauthorized launches. Clever and low-tech, which meant it wouldn't show up on computer diagnostics. Jake's fingers worked at the bolt, but it was tight. His lungs were starting to scream for air. He pulled harder, putting all his strength into it. The bolt shifted. Almost there. His vision started to blur at the edges. Just a little more. The bolt came free. Jake kicked for the surface, breaking through with a desperate gasp. Beth hauled him out of the water, and he collapsed on the deck, coughing. Lock's off, he managed. Launch it. Beth's fingers danced across the console. The probe hummed to life, its systems activating. The deployment mechanism began lowering it deeper into the pool, toward the moon pool exit that led to the open ocean. That's when the alarms started blaring. They know. Nalith shouted over the noise. Launch it now. It needs another 30 seconds to clear the bay. Beth yelled back. The bay doors burst open. 5 purist operatives rushed in, weapons drawn. They weren't station security anymore. These were professional soldiers, and they dropped all pretense. Jake grabbed a heavy wrench from his tool belt and put himself between the operatives and the console. It was a pathetic defense, a mechanic with a wrench against trained killers, but he wasn't backing down. Not when they were this close. Move away from the controls, human, the lead operative commanded in accented English. Yeah, not happening, Jake said. The operative raised his weapon. Time seemed to slow down. Jake saw his fingers start to squeeze the trigger. Then Nalith moved. She was fast. Faster than Jake had imagined possible. She covered the distance between her position and the operative in a blur, her hand striking his wrist and sending the weapon clattering across the floor. The other operatives turned toward her, confused about why a Ceteran was attacking them. That's Queen Nalith, one of them shouted in shock. She's supposed to be dead. Nalith used their hesitation. She swept the legs out from under one operative, grabbed another's weapon arm and twisted it into a lock. These were her own people, and she was trained in their fighting styles, knew every move they'd been taught. She was magnificent and terrifying. But there were 5 of them and only one of her. They recovered from their surprise and began coordinating their attacks. Nalith couldn't hold them all off. Jake looked at the console. 20 seconds until the probe cleared the bay. He had an idea. A terrible, dangerous, completely insane idea. But it was all he had. Beth. When I say go, hit the emergency pressure release. That'll flood the entire bay. I know. Just do it. Jake ran toward the pool controls, dodging around the fighting. He reached the moon pool gate system and manually overrode the safety locks. The gates that normally opened slowly to let probes in and out, he set them to blast open at full speed. Now, Beth. Beth slammed the emergency release. Klaxons wailed as the pressure doors blew open and thousands of gallons of ocean water exploded into the bay. The wave hit like a wall, sweeping everyone off their feet. Jake grabbed onto a support beam as the water raged past him. The operatives were tumbled across the deck, their weapons lost in the chaos. The probe, caught in the sudden current, shot through the moon pool exit and out into the open ocean. Its engines fired up automatically, and it dove deep, exactly as programmed. The message was away. Jake pulled himself up, soaking wet and bruised. The bay was a disaster, water everywhere, equipment scattered, alarms still blaring. The operatives were struggling to their feet, disoriented but not defeated. More guards would be here any second. Nalith grabbed his arm. We need to go. Now. Where? They'll lock down the whole station. Then we make our stand somewhere we can defend, Beth said, helping Jake up. Somewhere you know better than anyone else. Jake understood immediately. Main engineering. I've worked every system in that place. If they want to come for us, let them come. We'll make them regret it. They ran through the flooding bay, past the confused operatives, and into the maintenance corridors. Behind them, they could hear shouts and running footsteps. The entire station was waking up. The hunt was on. But the message was out there, racing through the ocean depths, carrying Nalitha's voice and her authentication codes. Racing toward the moment when it would breach the surface and broadcast to the stars. Now they just had to survive long enough for someone to hear it. Main engineering was Jake's kingdom. He'd spent 5 years learning every pipe, every circuit, every backup system and safety override in this facility. If he had to make a last stand anywhere on Tidebreak Station, this was the place to do it. The 3 of them barricaded the main entrance with equipment crates while alarms continued wailing throughout the station. Beth immediately went to the engineering console, pulling up security feeds and communication channels. Nalith found a toolbox and started fashioning improvised weapons from whatever she could find. Jake assessed their defensive position. How long until the probe's message reaches the surface? Nalith asked. Beth checked her calculations. 45 minutes at current depth and speed. Then another 10 to 15 minutes for the broadcast to reach any ships in range. So we hold for an hour, Jake said. Against trained soldiers. In a facility full of equipment that could explode if they're not careful. A grim smile crossed his face. The purists might be professional killers, but they didn't know this station like he did. They didn't know which pipes carried superheated steam, which conduits held enough electrical current to arc across metal, which pressure valves would blow if you looked at them wrong. Jake had spent years keeping this place safe. Now he was going to make it the most dangerous room on the station. He started moving through the facility, making adjustments. A steam valve here, loosened just enough. A pressure sensor there, disabled so the safety systems wouldn't kick in. Emergency vents redirected to create unexpected blast zones. He was turning 5 years of safety knowledge inside out, creating a maze of hazards that only he could navigate safely. You're crazy, Beth said, watching him work. You know that, right? I'm a mechanic. We see problems differently. Jake sealed off a section with warning tape. Normal people see this place as a power plant. I see it as a very large, very complicated machine that I can make do whatever I want. 20 minutes after they'd barricaded themselves inside, the purists made their move. The main door shuttered under sustained weapons fire. The barricade held, but it wouldn't last forever. Then the shooting stopped, and a voice called out in English. This is pointless. Surrender the Queen, and the rest of you will be spared. That's a lie, Nalith said quietly. They can't leave witnesses. We've seen too much. Jake had figured as much. He moved to a control panel and began typing commands. Then let's give them a proper welcome. The purists breached the door with cutting torches. 8 operatives poured through the opening in tactical formation, weapons raised. They advanced into engineering like they owned the place, confident and professional. They made it exactly 12 meters before Jake triggered the first trap. A steam pipe he deliberately overpressurized ruptured right above them. Superheated vapor exploded outward, sending the operatives scrambling for cover. Their thermal vision went white, their sensors overloaded. In the chaos, Jake was already moving, leading Nalith and Beth through a path he'd mapped out, around the hazards, through maintenance spaces too small for armored soldiers. Split up, the purist commander shouted. Flush them out. Bad decision. Jake had been hoping they'd do that. Splitting up meant they'd wander into areas they didn't understand. One operative advanced down a corridor between massive capacitor banks. Jake waited until he was in position, then overloaded the nearest capacitor. The electrical discharge arced across the metal floor, not lethal thanks to the operative's insulated boots, but enough to scramble his armor's electronic systems and send him stumbling back. Another operative tried to climb over a coolant exchanger. The metal was cold enough that moisture from the air formed ice on contact. His hands slipped, and he fell 8 feet onto a catwalk. Not seriously injured, but out of position and separated from his team. The purists were trained for combat in controlled environments, on ships and stations where everything worked properly. They weren't ready for a facility that had been deliberately sabotaged by someone who knew exactly which systems to break and when. Beth was monitoring communications from a hidden console. The probe just surfaced. It's broadcasting. How long until someone receives it? Nalith asked. Already happened. I'm picking up response signals from a Cetran fleet that was holding position 3 light hours out. They're moving to intercept now, but at maximum speed they're still 4 to 5 minutes away. 4 to 5 more minutes. Jake looked at their situation. The purists were regrouping, being more careful now. They'd learned that charging ahead was dangerous. Soon they'd start shutting down systems, cutting power, making the facility safer for them and more dangerous for the defenders. Then the station intercom crackled to life. Commander Phillips' voice echoed through engineering. Attention all personnel. This is Commander Phillips. I'm ordering an immediate evacuation of Tidebreak Station. This is not a drill. All personnel to evacuation pods. You have 15 minutes. Beth pulled up the security feeds. Her face went pale. Jake. They're setting demolition charges throughout the station. They're going to blow everything. They're willing to destroy their own people. Nalith looked shocked. The operatives in here with us are acceptable losses, Jake said bitterly. Once the station explodes, there's no evidence. No witnesses. No proof of what really happened. They can blame it all on human error. He felt rage building in his chest. Hundreds of people worked on Tidebreak. Engineers, scientists, maintenance crews, cooks, medical staff. Good people just trying to do their jobs. The purists were going to murder all of them to cover up their conspiracy. We have to stop them, Beth said. How? They've got armed teams throughout the station. Jake thought furiously. The demolition charges would be placed at critical structural points, probably tied into a central detonator. If he could reach the main power junction and cut the detonation signal before it reached the charges, he might be able to disarm them. But the power junction was 2 levels down, through corridors that were definitely being watched. Unless he didn't use the corridors. The coolant pipes, Jake said suddenly. The main ones that run vertically through the station. They're wide enough for a person to climb through if you don't mind getting wet and cold. That sounds awful, Beth said. It's going to be worse than awful. But it'll get us where we need to go. Jake looked at Nalith. Can your people survive extreme cold for short periods? Define extreme. -20 Celsius. Maybe colder. Nalith considered. Not comfortably, but yes. Our physiology is more resilient than humans in that regard. Good, because I'll probably die if I try this alone. I need you with me. They made their way to the coolant access point while Beth continued monitoring from her hidden console, providing updates on purist movements. Jake opened the access hatch and immediately regretted his plan. The pipe was coated in frost, and the cold ant flowing through the secondary channels was already making his teeth chatter just from proximity. This is insane, he muttered, then dropped into the pipe. The cold hit him like a physical blow. His skin went numb almost instantly. He grabbed the maintenance ladder rungs, his fingers barely able to grip the icy metal. Above him, Nalith descended, moving more easily in the cold but still uncomfortable. They climbed down 2 levels in what felt like an eternity. Jake's entire body was shaking by the time they reached the access point near the power junction. He practically fell out of the pipe, his muscles barely responding. Nalith pulled him up, rubbing his arms to restore circulation. "Stay here. Warm up. I'll handle the charges," she said. "You don't know human electrical systems. You can barely move. Guide me remotely." She had a point. Jake pulled out his portable comm and patched into Beth's channel. "Beth, I'm putting a camera on Nalith. She's going into the power junction. I need you to pull up the technical specifications." "On it." Nalith moved through the corridor like a ghost, avoiding the few guards who were focused on the upper levels. She reached the power junction and pried open the access panel. Inside was a nightmare of wires, circuit boards, and jury-rigged explosive devices. "Okay," Jake said, his voice still shaking from the cold. "The demolition charges are wired into the blue conduit, second from the left. You need to trace it back to the detonator hub." "I see it. There are many wires. Welcome to human engineering. Nothing's ever simple." Nalith's hands moved carefully through the tangle of components, following Jake's instructions. "Cut this wire. Disconnect that relay. Bypass this circuit." She worked with steady precision while Jake watched through the camera feed, his heart in his throat every time her fingers neared something that looked dangerous. "Last one," Jake said. "The red wire connected to the timing device. Pull it straight out." Nalith grasped the wire. Hesitated. "If this is wrong." "It's not wrong. Trust me. I've been staring at power junctions like this for 5 years." She pulled the wire. The timing device went dark. Throughout the station, the demolition charges deactivated, their detonation signals cut off. Then the entire station shook as something massive docked with the main airlock. Beth's voice crackled over the comm. "The Ceteran Royal Fleet just arrived. They're boarding the station." The next 15 minutes were chaos. Royal Guard soldiers swept through tide break, securing the purest operatives and arresting Commander Phillips. Station personnel emerged from their evacuation pods confused but alive. And in the middle of it all, Queen Nalith stood in the main corridor, no longer hiding, no longer running. 3 days later, Jake stood in the Ceteran flagship's observation deck, staring out at the stars. He was wearing clean clothes for the first time in a week, his injuries treated by the best medical technology the Ceteran hierarchy could provide. It still felt surreal. Nalith found him there. She traded her borrowed human clothes for ceremonial robes that shimmered like water in sunlight. She looked every inch the queen she was, but when she smiled at him, he still saw the person he'd pulled from a drowning trench. "The Galactic Council has ratified the treaty," she said. "Humanity will have full partnership status with the Ceteran hierarchy. Trade routes, research exchanges, mutual defense agreements. Everything we hoped for. Because you survived. Because you wouldn't let me die. And because you showed the Council something they needed to see." She gestured out at the stars. "My people value sophistication, elegance, and precision. We looked at humanity and saw chaos and crude methods. We couldn't understand how you'd survived this long with such primitive approaches. And now they understand that human ingenuity isn't about having the best tools. It's about making any tool work. It's about adapting, improvising, refusing to give up even when the situation seems impossible." Nalith's expression grew warm. "You turned a maintenance facility into a fortress using nothing but pipes and determination. You climbed through freezing coolant to disarm bombs. You saved my life 3 times with a wrench, some duct tape, and stubbornness." Jake laughed. "When you put it that way, it sounds almost impressive." It was impressive. More than that, it was necessary. The galaxy needs humanity's perspective. Your chaos balances our order. Your improvisation complements our planning." She handed him a small crystalline device. "This is an official appointment. I want you to establish the first human Ceteran Joint Engineering Academy. Teach our people how you think, how you solve problems, how you turn impossible situations into possibilities." Jake turned the crystal over in his hands. It was beautiful, clearly valuable, and represented an opportunity that would change his entire life. Part of him wanted to refuse, to go back to his simple existence fixing pipes and sensors. But a larger part of him remembered those desperate days hiding Nalith, fighting for survival, making impossible plans work through sheer determination. "On one condition," Jake said. "Name it." "The Academy teaches both ways. Your people teach us your methods, we teach you ours. Real partnership, not just humans learning to be more like Ceterans. Nalitha's smile widened. I would expect nothing less from the human who stuffed a queen in a coolant tank to save her life. They stood together at the observation window, human and alien, mechanic and queen, looking out at a future that neither of them could have imagined a week ago. Sometimes saving one life really did change the galaxy. Sometimes all it took was a wrench, some courage, and the stubborn human refusal to give up. And sometimes, Jake thought with a grin, the universe just needed someone willing to make the impossible work with whatever they had on hand. That's what humans did best. That's what they'd always done. And now, thanks to one drowning queen and one stubborn mechanic, the whole galaxy was about to learn that lesson.